Good morning, everybody. Lovely to have you here. This morning, we're joined by Jake Fiennes, the well-known Jake Fiennes, who has spent the last 30 years working in the land management sector, doing pretty much every land management activity under the sun. So it's quite a vast range of experiences to draw from, and was previously running the Raveningham Estate and is now Director of Conservation at the Holkham Estate, which is a 25,000 acre estate. And Jake is never afraid to say what he thinks. So this is set to be a very interesting conversation. So Jake, good morning and great to have you here.
Morning, thanks, Tim.
So Jake, the way we start all these is really handed over to you. Obviously, what I'd love to understand is kind of your journey. Like, how did you get into land management in the first place? What was the initial inspiration? What was the journey in? What were your early experiences? And then, how did you kind of move through your career in terms of Raveningham and into Holkham? What are you up to today, and what's your vision for the future? So yeah, would love to hear the journey to date.
Okay, so I left school at 16, having gone to 13 different schools with minimal qualifications, and had always, as a child, had always been interested in the natural world. So I would mess around in rock pools when we lived in Ireland. I would have an aquarium full of slow worms and feed them slugs. And I was devastated when the fox killed all my chickens. So my first rural experience was working in the lambing shed at the infamous Net Castle, while it was still a conventional food production farm, where they had a range of different farm businesses, from dairy through to combinable crops through to cattle and sheep. And I spent a lambing season there. I never forget removing the lamb that was dead inside the ewe, and the stench was
yeah, I've done that as well. It's quite
beyond belief.
Yeah.
And then I had a brief flirtation with the bright lights of London, which didn't work out for me. And then I called up Charlie Burrell at Net and said, could I come down for the weekend? And I stayed there for about 4 years, working on all aspects of the estate, starting in the Woodland, working on the farm, working with the game department. So just gaining experience. And then I felt that game management and woodland management I was really enthusiastic about that. So I moved to an estate on the Welsh border, which was a large high pheasant shoot, and I was there for just shy of 18 months. The biggest problem with working on the Welsh border is it rains all the time. So my father recognised that I wasn't particularly happy with endlessly drying my jackets. So through a friend of a friend of a friend, I was put in contact with Sir Nicholas Bacon at Raveningham, who had a wild pheasant shoot. And I thought, this is much more up my street. So I went, had a conversation with Sir Nicholas, and he employed me as a gamekeeper. And that was just amazing. Walking the fields, seeing how food is produced, seeing the impacts of food production on our environment, how I could make a difference. At that point in time, agri-environment was just sort of starting to emerge with the ESA schemes. So Norfolk was one of the leaders in this, with the Broads ESA, environmentally sensitive area schemes. And then as agri-environment grew, so did my position. I realized this was an opportunity to further enhance game production, mainly wild pheasants and grey partridges, but also the associated benefits with general biodiversity and thriving nature. I moved slowly up the ladder from gamekeeper to head gamekeeper to finally estate manager, and implemented what I considered the first cluster group. So every farm on the Raveningham Estate was entered into agri-environment with similar themes running across them. So then we created 6,000 acres of effective, high volume, high yielding food, sitting alongside vibrant nature. I used to invite school children to come through the Country Trust. Anything up to 1,100 school children would come a year, and we'd talk about food production and nature. And then we had the Brexit vote and the Health and Harmony paper. And I felt this was a real opportunity. I had to up my game and spread this message out wider to a range of land-based organizations, but also governments, government officials and civil servants, to say this is a system that works. This is a system that provides food. This is a system that is not detrimental to our natural environment. I really got the attention of a range of individuals, to the point that I was asked to join the National Parks Review that was published in September 2019 on how we manage our designated landscapes. And that was wonderful to be part of, wonderful to see nature coming back to the farm landscape, where when I first arrived there was little or none. You know, any of you that remember Set Aside, where we were forced to not produce food, but then we didn't produce biodiversity because we could manage it in a way that we just kept it tidy, and we'd top it in the middle of May when skylarks and lapwing and curlew were breeding on these meadows that we've created. So some of these perverse ideas of how food production and agricultural support, perverse ideas that were put in place to the detriment. So we now see with the Agricultural Act coming into force following and Brexit, we have this amazing opportunity to make a difference, to make a change. And I'm of the belief that actually British land occupiers should be at the forefront of this change. So in this whole process of, while I was enjoying creating nature in farm landscapes, I was then approached by Lord Leicester. I was on a trip. I was just coming back from, I had the most bizarre experience where I was coming back from Stoneleigh, having had a meeting at the NFU, where there was a hill farmer who was just about to have his farm sold from underneath him. There was a Devon beef farmer that was going to have all his cattle put down due to TB. And I left the meeting having a phone call from the Duke of Norfolk, sounding me out about a green nature writer, closely followed by Lord Leicester ringing me about a possible opportunity. And that opportunity was to work at Holkham and to be a senior manager in raising Holkham's environmental credentials, which were already great, but actually taking them to another level, demonstrating good land management, enhancing biodiversity, looking at sustainable food production. And 2.5 years into that journey, I'm loving it. I think I have the best job in England, but I'm biased. I'm yet to meet anyone that does my job. I work with some amazing people that have wonderful ambitions. It's trying to send this message to as many farmers and land occupiers as possible to say, let's reevaluate how we do things. Let's look at what government is proposing, and let's look at potential new income streams that I believe are very, very close.
And Jake, it's so interesting to hear your journey, and it kind of feels like you've been on a constant mission from kind of almost a young kid wanting to be involved in nature and kind of just constantly finding the avenues to kind of get you where you wanted to be. In terms of like the journey, what was it like when you were at NEP, in NEP's early stages, and kind of going to Raveningham and Holkham? Like, what was it you were trying to get from the experiences? Like, you obviously got yourself involved in a load of different things. Were you always trying to work out how the system could and should work? Like, how did you appraise what you were up to?
I didn't have an end game. I still don't have an end game. It's an evolution. So I was focused, when I was a gamekeeper, I was purely focusing on how I could produce a greater abundance of invertebrates, suitable habitat specifically for ground nesting birds. And then then you look at the bigger picture, and actually I'm also helping skylarks, I'm also helping yellowhammers, I'm providing habitat for hedgehogs, I'm feeding swifts through implementation of catch crops and cover crops that actually were feeding my sheep. Yeah. So you start to integrate the way you produce food with nature. And the sexy language that everyone talks about is nature-based solutions. So I was discovering these solutions for myself and playing around and knowing how playing around with a system that some would believe wasn't sufficiently flexible. If I look at some of the prescriptions for BPS, the prescriptions for agri-environment, I would gently flex the prescriptions to make sure that the outcomes were beneficial to all.
And so what I kind of get from this conversation is you're not really too afraid to bend those rules where you feel there may be, set-asides clearly didn't work, clearly they should be resolved, right?
So the first thing I did with the set-aside, when I can't remember, 25% or 20% of land had to be set aside. This was before we could grow industrial crops, which were part of set-aside, which is another slightly perverse way of thinking. The first thing I did was to ask the farm to go and disc the meadows to create more diversity, because they were just grass meadows with no, there weren't even dandelions or daisies in them. Yeah. So, and I could do that. So that wasn't, I was bending, flexing the rules, only not for my financial gain, but for the benefit of the wider environment.
And I think maybe that is quite, it's very easy to be conformist, I would say, especially when you've got BPS and cross compliance, you've got CSS, you've got all these rules and regulations wrapping around the farm system, which, as you say, actually have created quite a few perverse incentives where we haven't necessarily thought more holistically about what we're up to and the outputs that we produce. I mean, do you have any thoughts, Jake, in terms of, where could rules be bent now, or how should land managers who've got their land look to kind of think more from first principles or more holistically than just prescribed rule-based work?
So we're in a transition period. We still have direct support. We still have pillar 1, pillar 2. We have seen those. Seen the pillar 2, the stewardship payments change. They are still relatively prescriptive. I think we need to challenge those prescriptions. I do it on a regular basis. And I think, and the aspiration of ELM and the sustainable farming incentive and local nature recovery and landscape scale change are still very much in development stage. And we DEFRA are quite clear that it's an evolution, and they want to work with their partners and stakeholders in this. And I just feel, I feel we need to interpret what we're doing, what we have available to us today, which will possibly change in the future. So I would highly recommend that every farmer undertakes stewardship as it currently is, and be as ambitious as you possibly feel you think you can, based on your past investment and the size of your holding and what you're trying to achieve from that.
And Jake, when it comes to, I know we'll kind of get into this maybe slightly later. So obviously, I was just thinking, you didn't really have like the full conventional education system. You kind of went out and worked out the world the way you wanted to, and you worked in Australia and things like that. How did that also help guide your thinking to kind of, again, think more from first principles? Like, or what is your approach to self-learning and kind of learning how these systems can work? Like, how do you approach that in terms of your own personal growth in this area?
So the knowledge of our elders is key, and understanding, you know, so if we look at the last 50, 60 years of how land has been supported, we removed those key principles of land management and custodianship of the countryside, where every farmer would be able to identify every butterfly on his farm. Every farmer would know there were areas of farms that he wouldn't be able to produce food on, and we've lost that. And so in my journey is actually speaking to those which are there, day by day there are fewer and fewer of those. If we look at James Reedbank's book, where his conversations with his grandfather and how his grandfather understood the farm, and then when his father took on the farm, he was driven by this productivity, greater efficiencies by removing some of our natural assets. And my journey is understanding the thought processes of those that farmed 70, 80 years ago. I've got a friend of mine who was a friend of my father's, who's 92 years old and farms in North Suffolk. And he still applies those key principles to his farm, irrespective of support and incentivization for enhanced food production.
And are there any, so with Charlie Burrell and Nep and these, who have been the kind of the key people that have maybe been a part of that journey you've been on, Jake? So, you know, you were telling me before we started, you know, you spent some time in Australia working, like where have been the key influences for you as you've kind of been on the journey?
The key influencers are the ones that actually have mud on their boots.
Yeah.
It's the woodman that managed the forests of Nep, who knew the importance of the sunny glades and the rides, but also knew the importance of growth on trees and size of the canopy. It's the gamekeeper that understood the importance of everything and understood predation and understood biodiversity. It's the farmer that when we installed the first wetland at Raveningham, it was the tractor driver who had been ploughing that field for 25 years and knew where the lows were. I didn't need LiDAR, I needed that individual. When I arrived at Holkham, I asked the wardens on the nature reserve that were connected to the land to take me around the perimeter of every field so I could understand what they saw from their perspective. And it's that gives you the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to hear you say it that way around, because I haven't really heard that perspective really on these interviews. And it is what I get is how important it is, and also how rare it might be as well, to actually find those people that have been there long enough and maybe they've learned from the generations before them. And maybe is that one of the causes of the problems we've got at the moment, Jake, because we don't have that inherent wisdom accessible to us to learn from?
Science is endlessly being challenged. And we're looking at, you know, I remember climate change first time round where everyone said, no. Actually, when I was a child of the 70s, we were going to go into an ice age. So science and opinions change. Yeah. And actually, those that are the individuals that experience season on season, year on year, the farmer that sees perpetual rain for 3 months that we experienced this winter is relaxed and calm because he's seen it before. He's aware. He knows the right time to go and sow his crops. He knows the right time to harvest his sugar beet. And you cannot take it out of a textbook. We see this, you know, we see a huge raft of individuals coming into the industry, whether it's nature or food, that actually everything is from a textbook. And actually experience. My whole career has been based on life experiences and mistakes and learning by your mistakes. And that's and that's what we need. That's what we need more of.
And it's, we talked again just before we started about BPS, and you kind of alluded to it with, set asides and whatnot. Has that really taken a chunk of real experience out of the sector and out of the system? You talked about James Reedbank's grandfather, how James got lots of wisdom from him, but then James's father maybe just worked with the incentives in the market. Like, have we lost quite a lot of that inherent, or maybe my question is more, how do we bring more of that back in, so we're not textbooks and science, but we are local wisdom?
And that's the challenge. It's actually sharing our experiences, communicating, talking. We have this wonderful ability to communicate with multiple people, especially in the last 12 months. I seem to be talking to more people than ever before, because everyone's more accessible. If I look at the Secretary of State, he's surprisingly accessible through Zoom and Teams. We look at DEFRA's Janet Hughes, who, how many farmers and land managers has she spoken to in the last 9 months? It is phenomenal. Everyone I speak to, I've got a meeting with Janet Hughes, or I've just been on a webinar with Janet Hughes. This is DEFRA engaging with stakeholders, and stakeholders having the ability to share their experiences.
And actually, so you mentioning sharing, and I think that's absolutely critical. And it's obviously what we're trying to stimulate in Land Management 2.0 is building these networks and having a variety of different formats. The other, you've been mentioning as well, Jake, another side to the market. So everything that you've kind of absorbed through your experiences and the networks you've built, you're also part of the NFU in the East of England, is the Environment Board of NFU?
I represent the NFU's Environment Forum for the Eastern England.
And also part of Norfolk FWAG as well, I think you mentioned.
I'm director of Norfolk FWAG, and I also sit on the RSPB's England Committee.
And so there are these other networks that you're connected to, and you were also mentioning about the venture capitalists that you're talking to, or the people that are basically looking to invest back into nature. So part of the journey that we've got to go on is obviously sharing our wisdom on the ground and actually making sure we're making smart decisions. How are you seeing, Jake, that we can actually connect with these corporates, with these different entities, and actually start to move this knowledge around the whole system so we get something that really works?
Okay, so my belief is the 21st century farmer will enhance biodiversity and natural capital. They will capture and sequester carbon.
Yeah.
And they will produce food.
Yeah.
And they will be their 3 income streams. Government will facilitate the foundation to enable these new markets to take place. I was slightly concerned by some of the language 2 weeks ago from DEFRA, where we are also considering how we might extend to people receiving payments under private arrangement, such as carbon and trading of biodiversity net gain credits. That's a concern to me, because I think the role of government is to allow these markets to develop and create place. I think that the corporates and the large investment organizations have moved out of petrochemicals. There's a lot of money sitting there waiting for the right deck to be presented to them, that they can understand it and they can understand what they're buying into. And what they're buying into is future security for their business. The amazing thing about land occupation is it looks generations ahead. Decisions that farmers and land occupiers and landowners make, they don't make, yes, they look for their annual harvest of their crop, but they're also making decisions for their children and their children's children. And we need to have that put in place. And we need the corporates to understand that. This isn't a short, quick contract for a quick profit. This is about long-term sustainability that will affect all of us. If we disregard the natural world, it will come and bite us in the arse.
And Jake, so the corporates investing back into nature, which I think obviously it's kind of the mood music at the moment. You look at what Microsoft are doing, you obviously look at David Attenborough's work and whatnot. So it's definitely feeling like the trajectory. How do you think it will be practically accessible by the everyday land manager? We've obviously got thousands and thousands of farmers all wanting to do better natural management, food production and whatnot. How do we engage the corporates with that story so that we do actually have almost systemic change rather than the few big estates benefiting?
We have to make British land sexy.
Yeah.
When the Prime Minister made his announcement by 30 by 30, so 30% of the British landscape designated to natural capital and enhanced biodiversity, he mentioned panderlings and orangutans. You know, those are things I see in textbooks. I don't have a relationship with an orangutan apart from something I saw in a textbook or on a David Attenborough program. And I need the corporates to understand they need to think local but act global.
Yeah.
So they need to understand and recognize the importance of hay meadows, the importance of sustainable food production that sequests and capture carbon. They need to understand the importance of salt marshes. Holkham has thousands of acres of salt marsh that are most times of the year a rather, you know, dull, muddy mess, but actually in the summer come alive and vibrant. But they also, as I'm informed, reliably informed, they sequester as much carbon as a rainforest. And I think currently the corporates are everyone's looking for added value. Yeah. So farmers, I think, have the opportunity to buy in and offer land for added value, with the expectation that the preservation of existing will come at a value as well in due course. So our permanent pastures that can capture tens of tons of CO2 per year actually have a value. And all of the corporates that I'm speaking to are just, give me the package, send me the package that I can understand, and I can have something that I can send back in my annual report to my shareholders to saying, we are a socially responsible corporate business and we are looking after everything that is high on the agenda at the moment. And I think COP22, one of the key themes of COP26 rather, is nature. And actually, what can farmers and land managers do better than anything else? They can enhance nature. And we can do it while still producing high quality, high yielding food.
And it really sounds, Jake, from what you're sharing, is that this is incredibly doable. And actually, we are at the very edge of a new system. And, you know, Elms is going to ideally underpin it. Government's going to enable a market. The corporates are going to invest when they get the right packages of information to show that they have a corporate social responsibility they're taking seriously. And COP26 being an amazing place to demonstrate what we're up to. So it sounds incredibly positive. So just transitioning into the next phase now, like, what advice would you have for the everyday farmer? So we've obviously got our 90 acres just south of Guildford in Surrey. Jake, what would you advise us or other farmers to do to get business ready for this transition?
So I've spoken to a lot of farmers in my time, and I don't go into their farm kitchen talking birds, bees, and biodiversity, because they are farmers. And what do farmers do first and foremost? They produce food. So I want to look at their past investments. I want to know, for them to understand their cost of production. I want to know them to understand their fixed costs and their indirect costs. Because unlike many businesses, a lot of farmers currently will, the fuel for the house goes through the farm business, the council tax goes through the farm business, the wife's car goes through the farm business. And these are all associated costs that increase your cost of production. So I need to evaluate that. And then if I look at technology, and we know, you know, going back to the old boy who's been ploughing the fields for 30 years, he knows where the wet and the dry patches are. He knows where places that never produce any crop because there's too many rabbits. And it's actually, with yield mapping, we can understand where we're actually producing food and where we're not. And it's precisely what I've done at Raveningham, and we're applying the same approach at Holkham, where I asked the spray operator, you design the field within a field, that makes sure that your £250,000 worth of investment in machinery is running at 100% for the entire time it's in the field. So he takes out, in some fields, he'll take 20% out and say, that's inefficient farming. I can't get round that corner because my booms are too big. But in other instances, we might only take 5% out. So you apply a different approach, you apply the same principles, and you receive different outcomes based on field size and soil type. And once you have created these efficiencies within your business, it then allows you to say, okay, we need to value the natural capital. And actually, on the areas you're not producing food, you're producing biodiversity. We know there are many papers out there saying that biodiversity is beneficial for food production. We know there are incomes for that, so currently under stewardship. And we think that elm is only going to increase that income stream for those areas of lands we put into nature, or the protection of nature. And in due course, those pieces of land could have associated incomes. But we cannot marginalize nature to the corners of fields, because if you go back 70 years, biodiversity was produced across the whole farm. So we then look at, we've got the NFU's carbon zero by 2040. And how can we be less reliant on some of the actions and the management decisions we make that are detrimental to climate? So we look at reducing our artificial fertilizers. We look at reducing our pesticides through utilizing the principles of the very fashionable phrase regenerative agriculture. I prefer to call it restorative agriculture. I think any farm that applies these principles, and every field in every parish, in every county, in every country has to have different principles applied to it. So it's not a one size fits all by any means. The amazing Gabe Brown wrote Dirt to Soil, but he's a farmer in North Dakota. How do you apply that to a Devon farmer? You just need to work it out for yourself slightly, but you need to interpret it to your individual farm. And then we start to reduce our costs. We start to and open up other markets through carbon sequestration and natural capital enhancement. And everyone's currently, and this is a journey. We're not going to fix this overnight. If we spent 40 years degrading our soils, it's going to take us 20 years to put them right.
Yeah, I think this is, and so Jake, kind of just to repeat that back to you. So really it's about getting a really clear understanding of how your business is operating, the costs, the revenue streams, where's working, where's not, where it's not efficient to farm, don't farm, turn those areas back into nature. And through these markets we were talking about, try to derive income from, nature-based solutions as well. And I think there's this, and I guess embedded into that is also what you talked about right at the beginning, which is also kind of use your own intuition, your own wisdom of the land. Try to speak to the guys that got mud on their boots that maybe do know more about the local areas, and really kind of embed that wisdom inside your own farming business as well. And with that, Jake, what do you think? Like, we're obviously at a huge point of transition, as you talked about, elms coming about, the natural capital market coming about. What do you think the UK needs to do now to become a real case study for the rest of the world? It sounds like we've got all of the ingredients for an incredible, system to be in place that could be exportable. What do you think we need to do now at a UK level to become a case study?
First of all, we need to talk to one another a bit more and actually look at the middle ground. There are the extreme in all aspects of society. There are extremes. And the only point where you get to solutions is to meet in the middle.
Yeah.
We need to share information. Government needs to share information. GDPR, I understand the principles of GDPR, but actually the more information we share with one another, we will progress, we will accelerate progression. Yeah. implementation. How do we make the difference? We start to implement, to demonstrate. So, Holkham has we've created a demo, we've taken on a farm and we've created a demonstration model, and we're trying to, and we will be very open and transparent on what we're doing and where we're winning and where we're failing. We need to understand, the sooner we get a consensus, a global consensus of opinion of how we measure carbon capture, because we don't understand it. We know we can measure organic matter. We know we can measure biodiversity. We can use those in the interim. And once we have a global standard of food production, now if we all meet to that global standard, and we can agree, if we can start to agree something like that through COP26, so the concern from British farmers where they're producing food at high environmental and welfare standards to then export, to then get the supermarkets importing food at a lower standard and also to environmental detriment, that's not global. So back to think local, understand your farm business and how that works for you, but then it's government to facilitate this to happen on a global scale. And I think the UK government, every MP loves their ego to be stroked. And they have this huge opportunity at COP26 to say, this is what the UK agriculture is doing. This is what we're proposing.
And Jake, what can we do to package up the information for government so that they can have that rhetoric, so they can share that story? Like, is there anything that, again, we can do on the ground to make that job easy for them, do you think?
So we have a range of individuals that represent us. And it's actually, so they are our voices. We have and it's, Minette has mentioned environment and biodiversity more in the last 18 months than I ever remember any previous NFU president. Yeah. So they are changing the language. Mark Bridgman from the CLA is doing the same. The CLA were fundamental in the kind of early development of what land management should be. So they are our voices, and it's getting the messages to those organizations.
And Jake, with that, do you think, is there anything, so we can obviously share the written word and whatnot. Would there be value in actually creating more of a visual display of what's going on? Mini documentaries, mini stories, like, Kiss the Ground was so powerful. It's a documentary that ended up on Netflix about this whole idea. Do we need to be capturing more media and making it the story and the narrative simpler to share?
Absolutely. And I'm having conversations with a range of businesses that create visual media.
Yeah.
Some of it is very frustrating. Everything's about funding, but I think, why can't we do Kiss the British Countryside? You know, but let's do it less country file, but more food, environment, sustainability focused. My frustrations with some of the conversations I have with those very interested in doing this initially is, oh, it sounds a bit farmery. Well, hang on, we have a global population that's going to be 9 billion by 2030. Farming is recognized to have environmental impacts. How can we change that? How can we do that? One of the best and most obvious ways is through visual demonstration, reaching vast numbers of people, whether it's the the everyday person, or whether it's people with influence.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I think there is a very rich, powerful story to share here, which will inspire a movement. And so, yeah, I think this is definitely what we should be focusing on. Perfect. Well, Jake, that is the main question. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Jake, I can see a few chats coming through. If anyone has any questions for Jake, do shout. And so, Jake, let's start from the top. So Tom asks, did your early work at NEP influence your interest in agri-environmental work? Had they started the Rewilding project when you were there?
So NEP was doing what every farm was doing in the mid-80s, which was food, production. And NEP has a particular soil type which is not suited to cultivations. It has about 3 inches. I'm being very generous. 3 inches of topsoil before it hits boulder clay. So it's so NEP was part of a journey. NEP was an experience, but it wasn't the NEP that is now. And it's great to see that transition of NEP. But I think Norfolk, 27 years in Norfolk, and ESA and agri-environment within the Broads was the start of that journey for me. I remember creating this wetland and saying to the Natural England advisor, I want it to be a wetland. He said, well, the prescription says it has to be in permanent pasture. I said, you know, don't worry, just say it is permanent pasture. And it was actually a field of rape stubble. But actually within 2 years, we had created some of the highest densities of breeding lapwing on a very small area.
Amazing. And so another question here from Steve. So we haven't talked much about Woodland, but how do you see Woodland as part of the land management portfolio going forward?
So hi, Steve. Great to see your message. So Woodland are key. I've also managed Woodland, and I've started a lot of my early careers was wielding a chainsaw following the first hurricane in the UK in the late 80s, early 90s. Can't remember the year specifically. And I think we have amazing opportunities with our Woodland. There was a moment in time where management was quite static, where prices and taxes were prevented any intervention into woodlands. That's changed with wood fuel, and recognise the importance of that. I slightly, you know, the planting of 1 million trees everywhere, and where we plant them, so right tree, right place, yeah, is key. I think we can manage our current woodlands better, but I think we have opportunities. We have more miles of hedgerows than we do roads in the UK, but we could enhance them further. So if I look at, you know, woody growth, whether it's woodland or whether it's hedgerows or whether it's scrub, well, you know, the reason NEP is the success it is because fundamentally it's one of the rarest habitats we have, which is scrub. So, and you know, but farmers can't create scrub on their land because the RPA says, computer says no, because if you've got scrub on your land, it's not eligible for BPS, and that's changing. So we do have opportunities to further enhance our woodland in the UK. There's more forest in the UK now than there has been for years.
Perfect, Jake. Thank you. So Jeffrey asks, when and how does monitoring come into the process of conservation, and how important is historical land management, and how does it fit into the wider landscape?
So baseline surveys, monitoring are so important. You know, even if you've got nothing, if you start at nothing, you've only got one way to go. And actually, if you look, I'm trying to develop a tool that allows farmers to see the progression in the actions that they take through a traffic light system. Keep it simple. So if you're going to, you know, digging out ponds and enhancing ghost ponds is very sexy pastime at the moment. But it can grow and can be rich and vibrant very, very quickly. And if you've got an application on your phone that actually can identify 4 different types of dragonfly and 4 different types of amphibians in your pond, and you can see that progression, you buy into it and you want to make it work and you want to further enhance. So I think that data capturing is key, and I oversee a facilitation fund for the North Norfolk of about 8,000 hectares, and in year 1 we've just done a farm survey on all the farms to get an idea of what we've got. We've got farms that have been in agri-environment for a long time and have no nature. We've got farms that have no agri-environment but have nature. But we need to understand how we can merge those and blur the lines between each holding.
Perfect. And as much as we can track on that journey and share, I guess, was the point you made earlier about. So Johan from Farmers Weekly asks, is nature-based solutions a rich man's game? And how do smaller farmers get on board? And how does it stack up financially when you don't have the economies of scale?
So I think everyone has the opportunity to undertake nature-based solutions. I think that's, I don't think that's a rich man's pleasure.
Yeah.
And we all do it at different levels and at different scales.
Yeah.
But nature-based solutions can be the voluntary initiative, integrated pest management, integrated crop management, understanding rotation, to allow those, if we look at catch crops and cover crops, which have grown significantly. I'd love to know the total acreage of catch crops, cover crops in 2021 and what they were in 2010. So we've seen a huge increase in this. That is effectively nature-based solutions. Gabe Brown, I think, says there are 35 tons of free nitrogen above every acre in the atmosphere. We know that legumes capture nutrients. They either capture the artificial nutrients or the organic nutrients that we might apply to our fields, but they also capture atmospheric nutrients. And that then allows those are solutions. It's not necessarily getting a load of particular wasps that feed on aphids and spraying them across your field. I think we need to look at it slightly more holistically.
Perfect. Okay, so really it's still about doing what you can to bring in things like catch crops, just start to bring in sensible farming mechanisms, ideas, whatever rotations that make sure you can farm in harmony with nature.
Yeah.
Perfect, Jake. Phil asks, how do we convince policymakers not to overcomplicate the pathway ahead so that it is flexible and doesn't tie us up in knots?
And that's a real concern. If I look at the layering and of the sustainable farming incentive, and incidentally, I have applied for a pilot to try and demonstrate this to government. But the new scheme, the sustainable farming scheme, must be flexible, transparent, and easily verifiable. And it's the verifying that's the issue, because it's Treasury that pay. And I think, farmers can offer the best solutions. Farmer can offer easy, pragmatic implementation. And everything that we've seen, all of those farmers and land managers have experienced some of the issues with payments, some of the issues with inspections. Gavin Ross, who led the Health and Harmony paper for DEFRA, said he wanted the verification of schemes to be a sort of 3 strikes and you're out, as opposed to currently RPA, I'll be on your farm in an hour, and then you're 5% over the threshold for non-confirmation of the scheme, and we're going to times your fine by 3. And that's disproportionate. So the schemes need to be simplistic. ESA, the simplicities of ESA were brilliant. The early stewardship, the less prescriptive, were brilliant. But I do understand the need for verification. And I think we have, if we look at technology, there's no reason. There's a satellite that flies over every acre of British farmland every 6 days. Can that not be our verification?
Perfect. Perfect, Jake. So Ed asks a question. How's Jake see a farmer accessing biodiversity and carbon payments working in practice? Are there any emerging models that deal with the nuts and bolts of implementing these payments and making the money flow?
I'm on it. I'm on that one right now. I'm on that this afternoon. I was on it yesterday afternoon. So we believe, if I look at we look at stewardship as an example, where I think 20% of stewardship income or stewardship payments were taken by DEFRA to oversee it. We're of the belief that the farmer that can sequester carbon, that the farmer that can deliver biodiversity needs to be receiving 80% of that income, and that income needs to be facilitated by an organization that connects the corporates with the farmer. Yeah. So that contract is created by an intermediate to allow the farmer to deliver it. So I think this is, you know, I need 10,000 hectares in 6 months' time that will start to create this market. Okay. I'm looking for 50,000 hectares in 12 months' time. I'm looking for 100,000 hectares in 2 years' time. And this will we will become the global leader in this this new market.
Perfect, Jake. Well, I think that's the exciting thing. If the corporates, if someone like you, Jake, can get the corporates to, you know, get involved in this game, and then we can go and find the market to sell those, you know, ecosystem services to, then perfect. It's definitely a follow-up conversation we can have. So Paul asks, great vision, Jake. How do you see the transition taking place by those who don't have the availability of resources at hand and are potentially reluctant to change?
Some of the DEFRA stats suggest that 60% of farm businesses are unviable without direct support. DEFRA is saying that the sustainable farming incentive, when it's rolled out next year to more than a few hundred farmers in the pilot, will be easy for farmers to apply for. The proof will be in what we see. You know, if I look at ELS, I thought was relatively simple and straightforward. BPS, I think, you know, having filled in IAX forms, BPS is a dream. You know, RLE1 forms have moved. I still have a deep frustration that I still have to use crayons to fill in a stewardship application. These are real advantages in technology that we can utilize to gain access to the transition, and we need DEFRA to really buy into this. You know, mapping for me is a childhood passion, and if I look at, you know, I'm on Google Earth every half an hour, and I can look at the history and I can see how landscapes change, and it's understanding those and making that accessible to everyone. The average age of a British farmer is 67, but their sons and daughters know how it works. They are the, you know, the millennials and the Zs know how to apply this. So it's a lot cheaper than using a land agent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jake, this is also what we're doing, obviously, in the Land App, just to try to make this process easier for people. Mapping is such a fundamental underpinning of everything we do on land, and it's just so important that we make it easy for people. So perfect. Thomas asks, what are your views on rewilding within the context of the Norfolk landscape and farming system?
So so rewilding has a place. Those land that is not suited to sustainable, high-yielding agriculture has the ability to deliver examples of intense nature and biodiversity. I believe wilding's nice and sexy, but actually fundamentally wilding is extensive agriculture, because you're still farming your ponies and your pigs and your deer and your cattle. And I think that we need to, those that choose to undertake wilding endeavours on their land, I have the utmost respect for them. I once asked Charlie Burrell what was his ambition, and the 300,000 hectares of golf courses, if we could have that same area in wilding, he would be happy with that ambition. But what I'd like to see is that food production areas in our landscapes connected these hotspots of nature. We already had them with nature reserves, and actually how can we allow the highly productive food producing areas to connect, you know, to allow nature to move through our landscapes? And that's And that's where it all works, because nature needs to be free rather than confine it to small areas.
Amazing. Jake, thank you. I think that's probably getting to a good point to start wrapping up, because we are running out of time. We haven't got through all the questions, which we never managed to, because there's too much to get through. But Jake, I think it's been such a fascinating discussion about the wisdom of the farming sector, like how we do things properly, not being too prescriptive, not being too, excessively rigorous, trying to involve everyone and really creating a movement that works for the whole sector going forward into the future. Have you got any final closing comments that you'd like to make, just in terms of ideas, thoughts, anything you'd want to share with people before we wrap up?
Be ambitious, be open, be approachable, be transparent, and when you walk out the door, recognize nature when you see it. Not enough of us do it. See the skylark, hear the skylark, see the yellowhammer. Look forward to the first orange tip butterfly that should emerge imminently, and be aware of what you're creating, because you, British farmers, are some of the best in the world and have the ability to demonstrate sustainable agriculture at a landscape level.
Perfect. Jake, that's a perfect place to wrap up. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure going through that with you. And thank you everyone that's joined. I hope you've got a huge amount from it, as I certainly have. And we'll be making the recording available over the next few days as well. So you can always follow up or forward it on to any friends, etc. So Jake, thank you so much for your time. Really grateful. And yeah, look forward to the next conversation.